Kevin Sabet, his lack of understanding that there's a social justice link.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. I don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Okay.
Thank you for taking time for Hemp. I'm your host, Casper-Leitch. You are listening to the live broadcast of Time for Hemp all around the world on Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, and iHeartRadio, baby. We are the only all-cannabis network on iHeartRadio. I want to thank you for making that happen. Please, like any good joint, share us with your friends. That's how this network is found. 25 hosts. I got to count them out. We got 25, 26 different hosts producing about 40 hours a week or more, 45 hours a week of all pro-cannabis, ending prohibition content, all original. Please share it with your friends. It is Wednesday, Leap Day, law enforcement against prohibition. Put a spotlight on them every Wednesday. LEAP.cc. Make it a point to go there. Check them out. Find yourself a groovy speaker to bring to your neck of the woods to help educate the people around you about the failed policies of prohibition. Oh, excuse me. I'm just getting over the flu this week. Those of you who've tuned in know that. Monday, I took the day off. Did not want to, but my body said, you got to do that. You got to lay down. You got to take care of yourself. So I did. Tuesday, I was pretty stopped up. And today, you can tell I'm still getting over the flu. So, but we are in a war. And war does not take a day off. So I try not to as well. On Wednesday, Leap Day, law enforcement, Peter Chris is my joint host every Wednesday. And I want to thank you for tuning in live with us here on the big broadcast. Before we get going, Peter Chris is my joint host today. Peter, I want to thank you for being on the program.
Absolutely, Casper. And I just want to comment that thing you talked about, the Time for Hemp and all the work you've been doing. If it wasn't for the work you've been doing, I would be sitting here talking to myself right now. So I just want to tell you how appreciated all the work you're doing is by the rest of us out here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kudos. That is always appreciated. And our joint host today, oh yes, and don't forget, anytime you hear the word joint on the big broadcast, we hope nearly 2.5 million people all around the world pack their bongs, their pipes, their vaporizers, and their joints to take Time for Hemp. Our joint guest today has been working jointly with us for a long time, and she's also a joint member of Leap, Diane Goldstein. Diane Goldstein. Is it Stein or Steen?
It's Goldstein.
I got it right. That's cool. Diane Goldstein. And Diane, look, we have had so many wonderful advancements here recently with Eric Holder coming out saying that these nonviolent crimes, we're going to have to find some way to let people go free, that we're going to stop arresting in states where medical marijuana is available. Are we going to be singing Kumbaya in front of the nation's capital, hugging the DEA under one big party soon?
No.
Oh.
So we're getting there. So not to throw a damper on it, let's start with the Rohrabacher-Hinchey-Farr amendment that just passed in the House of Representatives and Congress. Huge political game changer. Now, the next step to that is it should be heard in the Senate in the next couple of weeks. I don't have the date yet, but our partners in coalition, including NORML, Marijuana Policy Project, Drug Policy Alliance, Americans for Safe Access already have a pre-written email that you can send to your senators, and it is critically important for your voices to be heard, because if it was not for all the emails and all the calls that all our representatives received, we would not have passed that amendment.
Okay.
So once it passes the Senate, then I think we may start doing a little bit of a dance, but then it's got to go to the president to sign. But the only thing that will do is it will remove funding for the DEA, so they can't interfere in the successful implementation of states' medical marijuana laws. And it only identified states that currently have them. And so does that mean that the DEA is going to stop raiding? No, I don't think so. But what it will do is it'll codify what the Cole memo addressed in its memo form, and it will make it law.
Very good. And it's all the work by a lot of people's efforts on this part. And like you said, in fact, I always say it at the end of the shows, that the only reason bad things continue to happen is because good people stay silent. And what you're talking about is a bunch of good people did not stay silent, made their voices heard, and they're actually affecting change. You know, it's interesting. I've been in this for quite a while, this movement, and I've never made any predictions before. And in January, I made a prediction for the first time. And that prediction is that by the end of this year, the federal government will remove marijuana from Schedule 1. If they do that, that will mean the legalization of marijuana in America. And do you think that's possible?
Yeah, you know what? I'm a little bit more cynical than Peter. I think that we're close. I'm not certain if it's going to be at the end of the year. I would love for it to be at the end of the year, Peter. So I'm going to be the optimist and look at the glass half full. But I think that we're coming exceedingly close to doing so. My concern is, as we go through this, though, is that the marijuana industry and the marijuana reform movement itself will step back from the overall issues of the war on drugs, period, simple. And I think we do have a bit of marijuana exceptionalism that isn't in the movement. And we've seen even really some diehard marijuana activists who continue to stigmatize those with other, potential substance abuse issues, or who are really trying to separate marijuana from the other drugs. And I understand why they're doing it from a political standpoint, but I think it's harmful to the overall goals of shifting the paradigm of the drug war and moving it into a public health policy, because we're going to need every voice of every person in the marijuana reform movement in order to continue to blow up the drug war.
You know, it's interesting. And we've had this discussion within LEAP before, but I'm trying to focus our attention, rather than being a drug policy reform group, that what we really are is a human rights group. And the interesting thing about it, in drug policy reform, incrementalism seems like it might be a good thing, but in human rights, incrementalism is never a good thing.
Yeah, and you know what, and I don't disagree with you, but I think that the nature of the public and the nature of America is to do everything incrementally. So, I'm not certain how to solve that problem. If I was queen, I know what I would do, or if I was, the first female president, but that's not likely to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. You got a lot of stuff going on out there in California that we want to get to, but you just had a little exchange with Kevin Sabat. You want to fill the audience in a little bit on who he is, and then tell us what's going on?
Sure. So recently I wrote an article that was called Pushing Back Against Legalization. So Kevin Sabet is the policy director for Project SAM, which is Learn About SAM. And what they are working very hard to do is ensure that we don't legalize adult consumption marijuana use, and they're also pushing back against a lot of the medical marijuana initiatives, because what they're trying to do is limit the scope of how people access medical marijuana. So they don't believe in whole plants, they don't believe in smoked medicine, and his voice is in fact being heard, because he used to be working for the drug czar. He's a professor at the University of Florida in their drug policy program. He has UN consultation status. He consults with CATCA and the large number of prohibitionist groups that are continuing to fight the war on drugs. But what's bothersome is in his pushing back against marijuana, what he has is like 5 things that he says we need to push back. That marijuana legalization is inevitable, that smoked marijuana is medicine. But for me, the most problematic is that there is no link between the social justice issues, racism, and the legalization of marijuana. So I went through this article that basically he never responded to. Lots of other people responded, but not him. And you know, it just, he continues to push and to inflame and to use rhetoric to push back on us, but because he's kind of the gentler, kinder prohibition, you know, he says that the laws are mean-spirited, but they're not racist, that there shouldn't be collateral consequences, but patients and adult users should continue to have to be forced to go into the illicit market in order to obtain their medicine, or that everybody who gets stopped and arrested for marijuana needs to have a public health assessment to make certain that they're not an addict, or to go to drug rehabilitation. And so, you know, their big push is against big marijuana. What they basically adopted is that that the industry itself is going to target and market to our children that DUIs are going to go up, that our kids are going to basically be lost to the marijuana fog. And so I think it really behooves us, as this industry continues to grow and to become mainstream, that we have to be incredibly responsible. And sometimes we tend to kind of poo-poo some of the harms that are going on. And I don't want to call them significant harms, but we also have to be able to properly assess that, you know what, for some people, marijuana isn't good, like our children. You know, Maureen Dowd, the columnist, went to Colorado, bought some edibles, and had a horrible experience with them because she didn't have, you know, the knowledge to understand on how you should use medibles. But the industry itself also didn't necessarily educate her. So, you know, and I know Colorado's in the process of coming up with some really stringent regulations surrounding the issues of medibles, but I think kind of like cops are right now, I kind of like to say is I beat up on the cops all the time because they're not held accountable for their bad behavior. Well, the industry itself needs to hold themselves personally accountable, and they need to police themselves so the people like Sabet can't blow up one incident and stop this, you know, move towards reform.
What always amazes me is he talks about the harms that the drugs do without even mentioning or thinking about the harms that the policy does. And we're actually doing more. In fact, I was in a little discussion with some harm reduction people the other day, and they were talking about the 3 pillars. And one of the pillars is law enforcement.
Correct.
And I said, what are the pillars of recovery or whatever? And one of the pillars is enforcement. And my argument is enforcement, in fact, does the most harm. It does more harm than the drugs do.
Well, Let's. We got somebody who also wants to join in on the conversation today, and so I'm going to make that happen if you all don't mind.
Okay, do we know him?
Yes, he's part of Elite. Patrick
Hello.
Heinz.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning. This is Patrick Heinz.
Speaking.
You're on the line with Diane Goldstein and Peter Chris and Casper-Leitch. Good morning.
Good morning, and the rest of the afternoon to you.
Thank you.
How you doing? How you doing, Patrick? This is Peter Christ.
Real good, Peter. Good to hear you.
Good. You work corrections up in Massachusetts, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And well, I always ask this question anytime we get anybody on that worked in corrections. Could you tell us what it was like to work in a drug-free environment?
Of course, there's no such thing as a drug-free environment. They went to extraordinary lengths. They stopped contact visits. They even have an X-ray chair that they sit new incoming inmates in to see if they've swallowed anything and so forth. But they always manage to get in, even if it's the money involved in drugs is so corrupting. You can have a bad apple in any organization, and from time to time, a CO would bring drugs in for someone.
Right.
The oxymoron of our age is controlled substances. Because what we call controlled substances are the least controlled commodities in our society.
Exactly. In fact, I always mention that thing about prisons because that we don't have a drug-free prison in America. And I point that out because a lot of us drive around our neighborhoods and we see those wonderful signs that call it a drug-free school or a drug-free neighborhood. And the difference between the people in the prisons and the people in the schools is the people in the schools have all their liberties and the people in the prison have given up all theirs, and yet we can't keep drugs out of there. So I think it goes on to prove the absurdity of this policy.
Right, and every time I see one of those zero tolerance policy notifications, it just makes me think that, well, here's a group of people who've absolutely given up. They have no ideas, they have no motivation or creativity on how to, implement harm reduction and age of onset to decrease that. It's just the nuclear option, zero tolerance. It's the nuclear option is surrender. We don't know what to do with this, and so we're going to nuke you if we get you with something.
Yeah. Diane Goldstein is also with us. She's a retired lieutenant commander for Rodano Beach. Diane?
Hey, how are you? It's always nice to meet a new LEAP speaker since we're spread all over the world, so to speak.
Absolutely, but meeting LEAP speakers is becoming easier and easier.
Yes, it is, because we are growing, aren't we? Which is the amazing thing. I think in the last 2 weeks I've interviewed four or five new LEAP speakers. So, and I keep asking the question: did we find you or did you find us? And all of them have said they found us. So So I think that says a lot for our message and what we're doing and the direction we're headed. But it's really interesting. You talk about the zero tolerance. Is I started our school resource officer program in California in the 1990s in the height of zero tolerance, and that was just absolutely the worst thing for our high school because the kids that needed to be under our supervision, we were kicking them out of school. And consequently, because of that, they ended up much more likely being arrested or actually then moving their way up into, California Youth Authority or juvenile hall facilities and then ultimately into prison. So I think it's more harmful than good, and I think it just shows a distinct lack of common sense.
Well, that should be etched in stone. The last thing, the drug policy, is commonsensical.
Yeah.
I think more and more people, as I talk to people, every day, just in my when I go to the bank, if I have an opportunity to mention something to someone, it's astounding how much agreement I get. You know, I'm not getting any resistance. People want to end drug violence. Prohibition violence.
There you go.
Because, and especially with marijuana. For instance, I'm all in favor of incremental change, and a good place to start is marijuana. 58% or so Americans say they want to change in our current policy, and arresting 750,000 plus people, mostly young people, for simple possession every year is a horrible waste of resources. Just the paperwork involved, because everyone who gets arrested has to go to court and all the paperwork that follows. It's just a horrendous waste of police resources that could be redirected to keeping communities safe. And, it's not the reefer madness danger that, the drug czar would like people to believe it is. And
Yep.
kids know that, so they feel they're being lied to. So if we, give up our credibility by continuing to pursue this foolish policy, especially in regard to marijuana, but all drugs, we give up our credibility. Why should they believe us about anything?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's interesting. I'm doing a lot of blog writing, and I just finished an article that hasn't been published yet. Here in Orange County, where I live in California, and up in Santa Clara County, which is another county, about 2 weeks ago, our district attorneys filed a cause of action in civil court against 5 major pharmaceutical corporations because of the opiate prescription drug problem, and no different than what government did with tobacco, is to recover the costs and to make them responsible and to say that, they lied and they marketed and they deceived the public, and thus they should be held accountable. And now yesterday the city of Chicago did the same thing. And so my article is, the solution is right before our very eyes, but we're ignoring it. Why are we not taking those principles of why a civil lawsuit works is because the industry is regulated. A dangerous substance, whether it's tobacco or, alcohol or prescription drugs, is appropriately regulated by people that are not criminals. Why can't we link it together? And so I think that, and people are starting to get that and understand it, and especially when we talk about we need to accept that America will never be drug-free. That's a pipe dream. That was a governmental lie that they sold to you. And what we need to do is learn to manage our drug problem while respecting the Constitution and the drug user itself.
And individual choice.
Individual choice and liberty, absolutely.
If a person wants to buy a fifth of whiskey and go sit in his home and drink himself to oblivion, and he's not beating his wife or driving his car, he has the right to make that foolish, self-destructive decision. But if we're not wasting all of our resources trying to arrest him, we can use that money for interventions and harm reduction and education, and perhaps recover that person's life form. A thing that is a little different for me as a LEAP speaker than a lot of folks in our organization is that I came to law enforcement later in life. The first years of my life, I was a pot-smoking hippie. And in 1968, I was on a motorcycle. I graduated from high school the year before, and I'm driving a motorcycle through Texas, going to California to check out the hippie scene, and I had marijuana on me, of course. And what I didn't realize at the time was that Texas, at that time, had a 2-year mandatory minimum jail sentence for possession of 1 seed of pot. And, of course, I'm 18. My prefrontal lobe isn't developed. I'm not, I don't have any of my if this, then that critical thinking, a good, well-developed ability to anticipate consequences for my behavior. But if I'd gotten pulled over in Texas back then and thrown into a Texas jail for 2 years, I think the trajectory of my life and every opportunity I have had to contribute to society would have been flushed down the toilet. I mean, after that little trip, I volunteered for the service. I was honorably discharged. I spent 20 years in corrections. I got an education and counselor's licenses and helped people and provided for my family. And but for the caprice of Providence, I could have been pulled over in Texas and my life destroyed.
Yep.
And the same thing can happen today to kids.
What's interesting? What's interesting about that is what you just articulated could be said by each of our last 3 presidents.
Absolutely. And most Americans, in fact. And everybody in America has either smoked pot when they were young or experimented or knows somebody who does. It isn't this perverse, rare thing in our society. It's a normal occurrence, and we need to start dealing with it in a normal, rational way, rather than this hysterical, nuclear winter kind of approach to it. This slash and burn approach to drug users in our society.
Oh, yeah.
Hello,
Yeah.
I'm back. I just bounced out for a second. I hit the wrong button.
Of course, but there's no doubt, and I think that's part of the issue that the general public is starting to get. I mean, and it's not just us out there publicly talking about this, but the media is finally starting to pick up on it. And when you look at things, I mean, it's been a bad week for law enforcement. Let's talk about burned babies in Georgia. That to me is which this is a rhetorical question, but it's like, when is it okay for us to treat our children that we're trying to protect from drugs in this way? And at the same time, in the last couple of weeks, and from a correctional standpoint, there was a mom who was arrested for drugs, ends up in county jail, ends up delivering her baby by herself in the jail, calling out for help because she's a drug offender. They ignore her, and her baby dies.
Yeah.
Well, it puts law enforcement in a horrible position and prevents them from doing their real job, which, of course, is protecting. Peter, you say it all the time. Law enforcement is great at protecting us from one another, but terrible at protecting us from ourselves.
Absolutely. And this is, again, I like to point out that this is a human rights issue. This is about the human right to make bad decisions as long as they don't harm another person or another person's property. And in fact, why we need to protect that human right is because those people that think outside the box are the ones that we call geniuses. They're the ones that gave us iPads and cell phones, the people that thought outside the box. So even though when they're first mentioning the new thing, the rest of us think they're stupid and crazy, we have to put up with it. Now, I admit that most of the stupid, crazy people are in fact stupid and crazy. But the fact is, we don't know until the whole thing plays out which is genius and which is stupid. So we have to protect them all. That's what we call a free society.
Well, and I think a 40-year experiment at a corrections model to try and reduce substance abuse is a pretty fair trial. And it seems like every 6 months there's a new hysteria, whether it's crack or whether it's PCP or whatever. And the last one I remember was Molly, and the hysteria was about Molly, and which is ecstasy or I forget. There's some initials or something, but
MDMA.
Yes, and the thing, I just read an article about that, and these folks went to a bunch of raves, and they bought some of this Molly, and then they tested it, and almost virtually all of it was not MDMA, or what are those initials again?
MDMA.
It was not MDMA. It was some heroin, some methamphetamine, and some angel dust, and all this and bath salts. Mostly it was bath salts with a little methamphetamine in it and maybe a little heroin in it. And this is what happens when you have an unregulated environment.
Yep.
And so people who really want to keep their children safe, they need this industry, this multi-billion-dollar industry, regulated, because an unregulated industry is just a disaster waiting to happen. And kids go to raves and big parties and festivals and so forth, and kids are going to make reckless choices and do some experimenting. But if they do this normal rite of passage, youthful indiscretion experimenting in an unregulated environment, they're exponentially more likely to do harm to themselves.
Absolutely.
And so, and they say, MDMA at the festival, and somebody died. But in fact, it wasn't MDMA. It was methamphetamine and heroin or whatever crap. Somebody who wants to put some stuff in pills and then just go to the festival and try and make some quick money off those stupid college kids. So this is what happens in an unregulated environment.
I often said when Seymour Hoffman died, he didn't die because of his heroin problem. He died because of our policy of prohibition. That's what killed him, because he had no idea what he was buying on the street.
Oh, absolutely. It would be like if any Tom, Dick, and Harry could make alcohol, and God only knows what you're going to get, and it's Russian roulette every time you open that bottle and take a hit. It could be grain alcohol and cause you to go blind, but no, we have a regulated industry for alcohol manufacturers. So at least if people certainly can abuse alcohol, but at least they know what they're using.
Right. Exactly. And in fact, we lost a lot more people to alcohol poisoning during alcohol prohibition than we do today, because at least we know the purity of it. And,
absolutely. And you never hear of alcohol blindness anymore. Exactly.
But there are still, and we in the 20 years I was on the job, and just something I want to mention to anybody who might just be tuning in, the three crazy people you hear talking about why drugs should be legalized. One is a retired corrections officer, one is a retired lieutenant commander from Redondo Beach, and the other one is a retired police captain from Tonawanda, New York. So it isn't like we're a bunch of hippies thinking drugs should be legal. We worked the system. We know what works and what doesn't work. And we're telling the society that we live in that this is a misuse of our profession.
And our resources and our youth and our country's potential by having so many people incarcerated that don't need to be. It's maddening what a waste it is.
Absolutely. Hey, Ann, you still there?
Yep, I am still here. As a matter of fact, I wanted to talk about harm reduction and how we raise our children, because as parents, I think one of the things that we've intuitively understood throughout the years is that there have been rites of passage. It's really interesting that law enforcement used to be accepting of kids' rites of passage. I mean, I was a teenager in the 70s. We smoked pot, we drank, we did all sorts of stuff that we shouldn't have. And the cops, instead of criminalizing us, took us home to our parents or to the neighborhood's parents. They couldn't find our parents where we got into much more trouble. And they only criminalized you if you went out and hurt somebody or stole from somebody. And the drug war has taken that discretion away from law enforcement, and they have, because the new cops, quite frankly, have been brought up in the world of the drug war. We have stigmatized whole segments of our society into viewing them not as people or our neighbor, our family, or friends, but as drug addicts, as horrible, evil, moral, failing people that don't deserve our compassion.
Yeah. Casper, we're up on the break, I believe.
We are, so we're going to go ahead and pay our bills and thank our sponsors. Please go to the websites of our sponsors and let them know that you heard about them here on Time for Hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
THCF Medical Clinics are the premier physicians clinic in the United States. THCF has offices all across the United States from Hawaii to Michigan. THCF Medical Clinics has helped approximately 150,000 patients obtain their medical marijuana permits to legally possess, grow, and use medical marijuana. If you have chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, or any other neurological degenerative disease, or if you have any gastrointestinal disorders such as GERD, irritable bowel syndrome, or if you have AIDS, cancer, spastic disorders, seizure disorders, or glaucoma, call us at 1-800-723-0188 or visit us online at hemp.org. Again, the number is 1-800-723-0188 and the site is hemp.org.
In need of a ganja vacation? Blaze away at Hotbox Jamaica. Chill, relax, burn all day while watching the amazing ocean view. Listen to the birds. Bathe in the mineral waters of the Ganja River. Munch on tasty Jamaican Rasta food. Take a weed farm tour and hold a meditation. Book this amazing vacation for $420. Get the Sativa Special, 7 nights in Sativa dorms with ganja meals and airport transfer. Check us out at hotboxjamaica.com. That's hotboxjamaica.com. A Haya meditation vacation.
Indigrow is your source for affordable induction grow lighting. First discovered in 1891 by Nikola Tesla, Indigrow lights deliver 11 years of electronic sunlight to your plants. Indigrow lamps require less than half the power of traditional HID lamps. Converting to Indigrow lights means you'll cut down on your power bill with less lighting. Indigrow lamps also use 5 times less mercury than traditional fluorescent or HID lamps, making Indigrow not only energy efficient but environmentally friendly as well. No more switching out lamps between vegetative and flowering stages. As nature intended, your lights get a steady dose of UV light. That makes your plants grow healthier and stronger. Indigrow products are manufactured in San Diego, California, and come with a written 10-year warranty. What Tesla knew, then growers know now, is that Indigrow lighting is the cost-effective addition to your victory garden. To learn more or order now, go to inda-grow.com. That's INDA-GRO.com. Or call 877-452-2244 to answer any of your questions. These guys really know lights. Indigrow really is your sunlight in a box.
Education and information. See what all the buzz is all about. It's time for hemp. It's time for hemp.
You have been charged with the illegal possession of the high-grade marijuana. Now tell me, yes sir, how do you plead? Light on the ganja just to get high. There is no other reason, so don't you ask me why. Light on the ganja just to get stoned. And I got Jamaican high-grade, the best weed ever.
You are listening to Time for Hemp live all around the world on Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, and of course, iHeartRadio. Big shout out to all our friends up in Canada. I want to say thank you to KDK Distributors for being nice enough to keep us loud, proud, and strong. Also, a big thank you to Paul Stanford and Marilyn Mathry and Al Burns. They have kept this network going as well with their love and support. We are having a leap day, law enforcement against prohibition. With that said, please make it a point to adopt a DEA agent. It would be good if you could send letters of love to a DEA agent out there. Let them know we are thinking about them. The war is over soon, and they will not be forgotten. Paul Stanford will be nice enough if you need a job after losing your job at the DEA, if you need hired. We're trying to get signatures raised here in the state of Oregon to get marijuana initiatives on the ballot. So if the war on drugs coming to an end is causing you to lose your job in the enforcement community, we can also find you a job as a bud picker here in Oregon. So, and also please send nice love letters to DEA agents. Send them holiday greetings and let them know about failed policies of prohibition. If you get a chance to, hug one. With that said, I will pass this joint conversation back to our joint guest today, joint host of this Leap Conversation, Diane. You mentioned, I read about it. It was horrible. The burned baby. A lot of people don't know about that. Briefly cover that, and then also let people know that giant sucking sound that they hear in California, well, unless they're close to San Francisco, it's probably the water coming out of the state. Is that right?
Oh yeah, allegedly. So let's start with Georgia. So in Georgia, the local narcotics task force sent in an informant to do a buy on $50 worth of methamphetamine. Because the informant came back and they didn't do any surveillance and they didn't do a number of other things that, from my perspective, when I was running our narcotics team, should have been done from a policy perspective. They simply relied on the informant and they asked the informant, so are there any kids in the house? Nope, there wasn't. Well, the person he bought the drugs from, in fact, used to live at the house and had been kicked out. What the informant neglected to mention was that there was, in fact, children living in the house. And so because the suspect had a previous history of a drug arrest and allegedly had guns and allegedly there were guards at the house, they decided to do a 3 a.m. in the morning no-knock notice. Well, the baby's playpen and crib, because the family had moved in with their family after their house burned down out of state, is partially blocking the door, and when they couldn't force the door in, they threw in a flashbang, and it landed in the baby's crib, and the baby currently is in induced coma and is likely not to make it. And I think what's worse, though, is that the sheriff's department and the DA's office, instead of saying, oh, my God, we screwed up, are saying there's nothing that they did wrong from a policy perspective, and they would do the same thing again. But they acknowledge that if they knew there were kids, they wouldn't have sent the cops in there at that time. But they called the drug dealer a terrorist and said it was the drug dealer's fault that the baby got burned, instead of taking a step back and looking at the policy issues.
Yeah. If they had done the proper background checking on it and everything else, they would have found out it was a different family and they would have realized that there was no warrant necessary. But they didn't bother doing that because they had an informant.
Yeah, and you know what? And so the suspect was, in fact, the son, okay? But the family had kicked him out. but still, they didn't. I mean, we're talking $50 worth of methamphetamine, which is, oh my God, it's like a rock. I mean, it's a small rock. And what is the danger to the community? That you can't do a proper surveillance and really vet the situation. Isn't that our obligation to public safety? And you know, the only thing that they say is the cops feel bad about what happened. No, you shouldn't feel bad.
Diane, when you describe this circumstance, it sounds like you're talking about a special forces attack on a Taliban stronghold. You know, with this military, all this military hardware, and one of the reasons law enforcement is gradually slipping down the militarization slope is because drug gangs are so well funded, they truly are a danger to society and officers because they're able to afford so many more and weapons and better and more sophisticated weapons. So this whole changing drug policy to a regulated environment, I just need to keep hammering away that this is a public safety issue, because when it is unregulated, it is just an unending, unlimited funding source for criminal enterprise.
Absolutely.
Yep.
You know, it's funny when you mentioned the military training. I remember when a lot of that melding of military and police started in the late 70s, early 80s. And I worked with an old-timer cop, and he said, if you're going to have a military and a police force in your society, you should train the military on the West Coast and the police force on the East Coast, or vice versa. They should never be trained together because they are so different in what their job is. When the military wants to take a building, they blow up the building. When we want to get a guy in the building, we're supposed to get the guy in the building, not blow up the building. That's not the way we do business in law enforcement. And we've been, as you say, this whole war mentality has done so much damage to us. And it's affected all levels of enforcement, even in corrections, you see it, I'm sure, Patrick.
Yeah, and, you know, one of the common, any discussion of war, one of the common terms is collateral damage.
Yep.
So when we take this war mentality and apply it to substance abuse harm reduction and try and impact it with a war mentality, the collateral damage is just extraordinary. But funding criminals so that people don't even feel safe in their neighborhoods anymore, and people don't want to go to the downtown areas at night because there's gangs and they're all armed, and every night here in Springfield, Massachusetts, it seems every weekend there's a shooting in the entertainment district. Well, that doesn't sound too entertaining to me, but I'm not going down there.
Yeah.
And it's usually gang-related.
Yep, and we support those gangs by keeping a policy of prohibition in effect. We're coming up on the last few minutes. Patrick, you got anything you want to plug in your area that's going on, or anything you're doing lately, quickly, website, whatever?
No, but there are nothing off the top of my head, but I live next door to Albany, and Albany is considering a regulation bill for regulating marijuana. And we're starting to work on that. We're going to be meeting with legislators and try and encourage them to adopt a sane, rational, doable policy. So, you know, I mean, there's movement all over the place. People are talking about it.
Absolutely, and one of the voices that are being heard is Leaps. Diane, you got anything?
You know what, Noah? You guys can find me blogging at ladybud.com amongst a couple other places. I'm working with a lot of women in the cannabis industry. You're starting to see, which is really interesting, is you're starting to see a lot of women take leadership roles and bring kind of that mom nurturing environment and discussion surrounding how the industry itself moves forward and how we end the drug war. It's kind of like that moms and cops. We have that moral imperative, and people are going to listen to us. So, continue to look for what we're doing out here. 2016 will be our ballot initiative, hopefully. But we are making progress. We have brought the California police chiefs to their knees because they finally agreed that we need regulations. So they're actually formulating regulations in the Capitol that are actually listening to both cops and advocates.
Well, we still got a couple of minutes, too, that you can address the problem about the water there.
Oh, God, the drought. So California's in the midst of a water drought, like there's no going out of style. We haven't started rationing down here in Southern California, but Northern California is pretty problematic. One of the issues, though, is that there is blame being placed on the both licit and the illicit growers. And so the Emerald Growers Association and other organizations here are kind of fighting back to show that the water reclamation issues and the water damage issues are not just with marijuana, but it's because of the lack of regulation. And they're also tying in how much water is used by grape growers and other agriculture. But clearly the biggest part of the problem is the lack of regulation surrounding farming.
Absolutely. Well, that's part of it, and we're going to finish up this segment. I'll be kicking it back to Casper. Leap.cc, copsaylegalizedrugs.com. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. None of our speakers are paid, but we do pay the expenses when they travel, and that does cost some money, and any donation made to us is a tax-deductible donation. And as I end every show with, remember that bad things happen because good people stay silent. Casper, back to you, and thank you for sharing your audience with us once more.
Well, that is true. That is so true. And I want to thank all the LEAP speakers today coming on the program. It was quite a blessing to be able to have 3 on. I need to make everybody aware. I must have smoked a heavenly joint and had forgotten that I had booked Patrick for today, and that was my bad. And I was lovingly blessed to have Diane come on as well. And when the show started, Mr. Heinz called and wanted to know what's going on.
Hey, you know what? It was a good mistake because I have an opportunity to actually hear Patrick's voice because I've only read his biography and seen his picture. So it's always great when we can actually connect more LEAP speakers.
Well, and the 3 of you together really made for an excellent conversation. So I'm so glad it happened that way. You're right. He brings a lot to the table, as do you and Peter. And I think our audience truly had a lot to benefit from it. So I want to thank you all for being part of this each Wednesday. One of the reasons why this programming is so stellar is because of the amazing people at LEAP who come on every Wednesday and let everybody know how important it is to end prohibition. You guys rock.
Hey, thank you for everything, like always, Casper. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Patrick.
Yes.
It was great to speak to all of you.
And you guys are part of the family here, so we'll be having you back frequently throughout the next millennium or until the end of the war finally does occur. That reminds me, don't forget to adopt a DEA agent. We want to send lots of love to that agency whenever you get a chance. And also remind people at the DEA and Homeland Security, there's no point in tapping our phones. You can just go to timeforhemp.com and listen to our conversations there.
Every DEA agent could get a job in the FDA.
Yes, exactly.
Once it's a regulated commodity, everybody, the DEA can move right over to the FDA.
Absolutely. Tomorrow, we put a spotlight on what's going on here in America. American policies does have a major effect on the whole planet. And, of course, Fridays, Michael Kravitz and I hop into our make-believe transportation. You can think of it as a ganja bus or a truck or whatever you like to ride in, and we go into a small town somewhere on the planet and put a spotlight on hardworking activists who are trying to raise the voice about the need to end prohibition. Coming up next, we got Steve Danks coming out of Manchester, England. We've also got programming throughout the course of each day from many of our 25, 26 different hosts that are producing 25 million hours a year of hours trying to let you know how important it is to end prohibition. Seriously, we got to bring these policies to a stop. We're going to wrap it up now. Remember, the next time you hear me, you'll know that it's time for hemp.